So the inspiration behind today's presentation has just been summertime. I don't know if many of you have been to farmers markets before, but over the past few years, they've really gotten more popular and are popping up in most communities, even small towns. And I know that it can somewhat be intimidating for people to go and explore them for the first time, and maybe you may not even know where to find the closest one to you. So we'll talk about a lot of tips and tricks for navigating the farmers market. But before I dive into what we'll all cover today, I'll introduce myself a bit better. Bear with my computer while it thinks. There we go. So a little bit about me. So again, my name's Lindsay. I've been practicing as a dietitian with the Pro Healthcare Cancer Clinics for the past 5 years, but I've been a dietitian for a little over 9 years. I was born and raised in Wisconsin in the southeastern area, so I'm probably currently sitting about 10 miles from where I grew up exactly. So really kind of a native to the community. I've always been interested in health and nutrition, and that's really what drove me into studying nutrition and becoming a dietitian. I've always loved being in the kitchen. I remember cooking family meals even starting as early as elementary school. So if you're a parent, I'm sure you would love that. And there's a picture with my little guy. He already enjoys getting in the kitchen. This picture is probably about I don't know, not quite a year old, but he's a little bit more able-bodied at this point. And then also, I've really gotten into gardening since my husband and I purchased our first home now about 6 years ago. So just really enjoy using fresh produce, using produce that's native to Wisconsin. So we'll talk a lot about incorporating local produce into our cooking and into meals today. Just a couple of objectives for today's presentation. So the first objective is navigating how to find the nearest available farmers market. So again, many of you may have been to farmers markets in the past, but maybe may not have been to your local farmers market. So we'll talk about how to find the one closest to you. Also, we'll talk about how to find the produce that's available during each season so that you can help to plan what produce you might pick up at the farmers market and better meal plan. And then finally, I'm going to go through some resources on finding recipe and tips on preparing produce from the farmers market, because from patients I've worked with, some of the feedback that I've heard is, well, when I go to the farmers market, there's only a couple things that I recognize, and there's so much new produce that I've never made before, it can somewhat be intimidating. So we'll talk about how to find resources for preparing produce that you've never made before. So all about the farmers market, so the basics. So what is a farmers market? So again, many of you are probably have been to a farmers market, and if anybody wants to raise their hand and say whether or not they've been to a farmers market, yep, I see some hands raised. Some screens off. But so some of you have been to a farmer's market, and again, some of you may have not. So what is a farmer's market? So it's a public market of local farmers, so farmers who are local to the community, typically probably within at least 60 miles of that local market, that sells their produce or their products directly to consumers or community members. So they've helped to facilitate personal connections between the farmers, the communities, and the community members. They allow to cut out the middleman. So I really think that this past year, a lot of people have become aware of the importance of putting money into the local economy and supporting local entrepreneurs. And farmers are kind of the original local entrepreneurs, so really pouring that money directly into the farmers that are local to the area and the state. So a little bit of trivia here. So just in 1994, there were just under 2,000 farmers markets. So in about the past 22 years, it has more than quadrupled, and now there's close to 9,000 farmers markets. So that was a recent statistic pulled from the USDA. So some pretty big popularity there, quite a growth. And really, they wouldn't be there if there wasn't the demand. The farmers wouldn't show up week after week if there wasn't the demand for it. So really a great program. Over here on the right, I have a photo from the local Pewaukee Farmers Market. So I'm currently at the Pewaukee Cancer Center. So this is just up the road on 164. I want to say the church is Christ the Lutheran Church, and it's in the parking lot there on Wednesday afternoons. Bear with my computer again as it takes a minute to think. There we go. So now I just want to go through 7 reasons why to shop the farmers market, because a lot of people may go to it because it's a fun outing on a weeknight or on a weekend, or maybe because they like to find new food, but there's a lot of different benefits, and I just wanted to highlight 7 different benefits. So first, you get the freshest available produce. So let's just kind of close our eyes and imagine. So if you were to purchase produce at a grocery store, you would have to, first, the farmer has to harvest the produce and harvest enough to fill up a truck. And before it gets shipped, it might sit for maybe 1 to 2 days at the minimum before it gets shipped out. The shipping process sometimes can take days before it arrives at a local warehouse or at the local grocery store. So typically, especially with many chain grocery stores, it goes to a local warehouse where the produce is then distributed between the local grocery stores. So the produce may have been harvested a week prior or even longer before it arrives at the grocery store. And then once it gets to the grocery store, it could sit for several days before it's kind of getting towards the end of life where they aren't able to sell it. And then, of course, the issue with food waste. So unfortunately, a couple different downfalls with the current system where produce is purchased maybe a week or 2 after the harvest. Many farmers markets, especially the ones where they are in the afternoon, the produce is picked that same morning. And there's so many different benefits to having produce harvested the same day that it's consumed. First off, better flavor. Has anybody ever had something straight from the garden within an hour or 2 of picking it? Couple hands. And the flavor is just so much better. I've heard some people say almost that it tastes like a super powered or super flavored tomato or green bean or pepper. It just has so much more flavor when it hasn't been sitting for a week or 2 weeks before it's consumed. Please. Also, it has better nutrient retention. So a lot of vitamins and antioxidants that are in produce, the longer it sits, the lower nutrient content it has before it's consumed. And that's true as well for antioxidants or working in cancer care. I often educate people about cancer-fighting nutrients, phytonutrients. So they're nutrients housed in the color, the flavor, the odor of produce that help to fight cancer cells through decreasing inflammation, protecting our body's cells from damage. So the longer that produce sits, typically the amount of antioxidants or phytonutrients starts to decrease over time. So having produce at their peak of freshness really is best. Okay. Another reason is farmers markets often offer a greater variety. So I know personally, even as a dietitian, I've gone to a farmer's market and I have seen produce I've never seen at a grocery store before. And it's exciting because a lot of the produce that's sold is native to Wisconsin, where it really thrives in our local grounds and in the local farm fields. And you may be surprised at the different things that are available and things that you would have never tried elsewhere. So a great variety. And then also, it's great for your health. So I know I kind of referenced a couple of these points, but the produce is sold at the peak of freshness and soon after the harvest with the highest nutrient retention. I think one of the best benefits too is the farmer's right there. So sometimes you'll even see that they still have dirt on their hands from working at their farm during the day. So you can ask them about their growing practices. One thing that maybe some people aren't aware of is many farmers who are at the farmers market are very conscientious about their growing practices and try to minimize the impact on the environment. They may not have the organic certifications. They are actually fairly difficult to get and maintain and can be a quite expensive process. But when you ask a farmer about their practices, they may have chosen to completely eliminate or reduce pesticides or herbicides, so maybe following organic practices, but may not have the organic label, which I know is important to some people, but you may find that that farmer is following those practices. So something that you can ask the farmer about. Oh, one thing that I did want to point out while we're on this screen. So on the right-hand side here, there is a chart for the produce that is available by season throughout the farmers market season, I should say. So most farmers markets are available late May or early June through end of October. So it lists out the produce that would be available month by month. So the most abundant being September and August. So this will help you too if you're planning out a menu, just to kind of know what to expect. And we'll talk about some strategies for shopping the farmers market in a later slide, but one of the best things to do if you have something that you're looking for is get there early. Farmers markets typically open up as early as 6 or 7 a.m. Get there early because then you get first pick. Sometimes the most popular items can sell out fast. All right. So a couple more reasons to shop at a farmer's market. Oftentimes farmers markets can actually be a bit more cost savings. And if people are using food benefits such as the goodness, I forget the name of it, but the food subsidy cards in Wisconsin, you can use those at a farmer's market, which is awesome. That's a program that just recently was implemented within the past couple of years, and that really is a nice way to help people who may not be able to afford groceries without assistance to be able to purchase good, healthy foods. So oftentimes a bit more cost effective. You might find that you save the cost of the produce at the farmer's market might be 25% off or 30% off, or sometimes they have barrels of kind of the scratch and dent apples or tomatoes if you're using them for like salsas or marinara sauce or applesauce, where you can get a big amount for a very minimal cost. The next benefit is you get to support your local farmers. So unfortunately, family farms have decreased over the years. By raise of hand, did anybody have a family member that farmed that is no longer farming, or a family member that farms and is still farming? I don't see any hands, but that's okay. I have my in-laws still farm, but I would say that it's getting more and more difficult to be able to operate as a family farm, because with the bigger competitors, they're able to decrease margins and therefore kind of are taking over for the small family farms. So this is a great way to keep local farmers in business by cutting out the middleman again. So really lots of benefits there, more local jobs, more money back into your local community. And then you get to know where your food comes from. So you might find that there's a farmer just right up the road from you that you never knew about. I know there's a local CSA that just got started up within the past few years, Gwendolyn Farms out in Waukesha, and they're over at the Brookfield Farmers Market. So you get to learn about their agricultural practices again. And then shopping locally helps to protect the environment. So conventionally grown food travels on average almost 1,500 miles. Does that surprise anybody? I mean, 1,500 miles. We were just visiting my in-laws out in Pennsylvania. That's all the way out to about Baltimore and back. So quite a long trip there. Especially when foods aren't purchased in season. Typically they're purchased from outside the country. So a lot of produce will have boarded a ship or a plane in order to make it to your local market. So this means higher use of fuels compared to produce purchased locally, especially if the grower is within 60 miles, I mean, that's a very significant decrease. When you purchase local, your food travels shorter distance, and just that in and of itself decreases emissions.
And hey, Lindsay, I just want to interrupt you real quick. Someone asked what a CSA is.
Oh, yes. So we will go through that, I think, in the next slide here. Good question. I will not spoil it just yet. Okay, so what is a CSA? So I know this past year, especially in 2020, the 2020 farmers market seasons, the farmers markets were trying to make it as safe as possible by asking only one family member to shop at the market and trying to extend times in order to make it so that more people would be able to attend, but over a longer time span, so to help social distance. And there may be some people who may not be comfortable going to the farmers markets yet. Unfortunately, there are still cases of COVID going on. I know we all hope that this could come to an end by tomorrow, but I know some people are still trying to be cautious. So there are ways to get local produce without going to the market. So a CSA it's an acronym for Community Supported Agriculture. So there are several different CSAs in Wisconsin, and more than several, probably 100 available, I would say. So it's a farm that how they operate is they actually have people purchase it's called a share, purchase a share at the beginning of the growing season or even before then in winter so that they know how many shares to make throughout the season. And typically there is a max amount of shares that are available per season. So if that's something you're interested in, I would encourage you to start looking for a CSA to purchase from starting in the winter months. Most CSAs, unfortunately, are sold out by this time in the season, but you prepay for it, so you can pick that. You can either pick up a produce box weekly or every other week or even once a month. And usually there's pickup sites throughout the county, so you can pick the pickup site that you would want your box dropped off at that week or, again, every other week. I know one local, the name of the CSA is escaping me, but they have their pickup at the Good Harvest Market in Pewaukee. So they are all over Waukesha County. So one of the ways that you can connect with the CSA is going on the Fair Share CSA Coalition website. And on that website, it will list out the CSAs that are available in Wisconsin and also show you where the pickup sites are so you can find a pickup site close to you. Another way to find a CSA would be, I've seen them advertised at the Good Harvest Market, or if you know of a friend or family member, I know a lot of people were just commenting that they've belonged to a CSA for years. Sometimes CSAs are only word of mouth where they don't necessarily advertise or belong to the CSA Coalition in Wisconsin. That's a minority, though most do advertise on that Fair Share website. And I want to say it's even free to advertise on there. The one nice thing about a CSA is you get what you get. So you get whatever produce is grown that week, that is harvested that week. It's divided between all of the boxes. And some have an option for a large box for a family or a small box for 1 to 2 people. So all of the produce is divided between those boxes. And oftentimes, too, many CSAs will include cards on how to prepare each of the pieces of produce, or give 1 or 2 ideas on how to prepare, because you might open it and not even really know what to do with it. And we'll talk about ways to help with that too, preparing the unknown. And let's say you're interested in the CSA and you want to try their produce, but you weren't able to get on their list this year. So many CSA farms also host farm stands at local farmers markets for an overabundance. So that helps to also make their produce available to community members as well. Another way to get local produce without going to a farmer's market is to garden. So I know this past year, a lot of people, especially in 2020, started to get back into gardening because we all had a lot more time at home, and it's a great way to get outside. It's very therapeutic, especially during kind of a depressing year last year in 2020, and even this year. I think we're still kind of not quite back up and running back to normal. So I think gardening is a great way not only to grow your own local produce, but also get that mood boosting benefit. And then the last way to check out local produce without going to the market, a lot of markets actually will label if something was purchased locally. So the Sendex food markets, they have a local label for foods that are purchased in Wisconsin. So you just want to look, it's typically a bigger sign where they have it labeled that it was purchased in Wisconsin, or they'll have the local sign on it if it was purchased within, I think, within 100 miles, I want to say. And then both the Good Harvest Market out in Pewaukee and Outpost Natural Foods, which is in mostly Milwaukee County, they have several locations there, have labels of where the produce came from. So the Outpost Natural Foods, they will list out the miles to the market in store and also online for the different vendors. Another thing that I did want to mention is that local produce and local products are not just available to people in the spring and summer and fall months. It's also in the winter months. The Milwaukee Winter Farmers Market is hosted in the Mitchell Park Domes. I want to say that's in Greenfield, but kind of almost near the stadium. So the Mitchell Park Domes, so it's actually pretty large. There's free admittance, so you get to go into the Mitchell Park Domes for free, and they offer produce that's typically stored pretty well throughout the winter months. So like potatoes, carrots, squash would be available. Also too, they sell local meats, eggs, poultry, dairy products like cheeses, yogurts, milk, cider jams, honey. And I just saw a comment too that Oconomowoc also has their winter farmers market as well, which I have heard of before, but I actually haven't attended. So thank you for that comment. If you're interested in finding out about the Milwaukee Winter Farmers Market, there is the link on this slide in order to find out the dates for the starting season, and it is held on Saturday mornings. Another thing that many vendors do that you can, for local products that you can purchase in the winter months, is that there's this little label called Something Special from Wisconsin. So if you see it at the grocery stores, just know that it was produced locally. All right. So now we're just going to do a little bit of a demonstration to find out where your local farmers market is and the hours. So I'm just going to switch over to my web browser. Okay. And can I get a nod if you can see the web browser okay? Yep, okay, perfect. So this link was on the slide, so you can just follow the link. So this is the Wisconsin Farmers Market Association website. So I live in Waukesha County. So I'm just going to click on my county as it thinks. And then I live in Pewaukee. So I can click on, so each one of these cities, so I think most every city in Waukesha County has an available farmers market. So I'll click on the Pewaukee link, and it says days open Wednesday, and it's at Christ Lutheran Church in Pewaukee. So just right up here on 164, just south of Capitol Drive, and it does have a map on where to locate it. And it says hours are 3:30 to 7. It does advise to bring cash. Many vendors now do accept credit cards or debit cards, but bring cash just in case. And then actually, I didn't check this one out beforehand, so I am going to go back and go up to the Brookfield one because I know for sure they have their vendors listed out. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the Brookfield one, and then each one of the farmers markets has the link to their website. So I'll click on the Brookfield Farmers Market, which if you haven't been to it, it is a big one. Bear with me real quick. And then if you're interested in the vendors that are available, you can click the Vendors tab, and then it'll list out the vendors that are available most weeks. So sometimes vendors will be there on an alternating basis. So I know I mentioned the Glen Hill Farm, which is a CSA local to Waukesha, and then they also have the contact information for most of the vendors as well. So just a nice way to see the vendors that will be available most weeks at each one of the farmers markets and find out the hours ahead of time. So just to click back to this tab, so for Brookfield, it starts at 7:30 to noon. So if you have something that you're hoping to get, plan to get there early, because most of these farmers markets are fairly well attended. Another thing to note, I know many of the farmers markets don't just have produce, they also have local vendors. So it lists on here that arts and crafts are held the third Saturday of every month, and I know the Wauwatosa Farmers Market has local artists too that come in. I want to say it's the fourth Saturday of each month. So now we'll click back to our slideshow here. Okay. So this was a slide just demonstrating the farmers market webpage since we already just went to it live, which I think is a bit better. We'll flip through. Okay. So again, this was the vendors page that listed out the vendors. And another pro tip would be talk to the vendors. If you know that you're going to attend the same farmers market week by week, you can ask them what to anticipate the next week. So just to kind of get a little insider knowledge. On the side here, I did say bring cash. Many vendors are offering an option for debit or credit card, but the benefit with cash, especially if one of your main motivations is trying to support the local economy, the benefit with cash is that all of the purchase price goes straight to the vendor. Okay. So this is another really exciting resource that I want to do a little bit of a live demonstration with. So this website, thekitchen.com, so the kitchen is spelled a little bit weird. It leaves out the E, just to point that out. It has FYIs on how to prepare so many different unusual produce, I should say, and just different strategies too. So we're going to flip back to the web page, and I'm just going to show you a couple things that are available. Oopsies. Okay, here we go. So this was the page that was just referenced. So tips and tricks with vegetables as well as all produce. So one thing that I did want to point out here, so it has a link on how to prepare summer produce. It has a link on easiest way to freeze tomatoes, how to grill vegetables, one thing you should do when freezing zucchini. So just a lot of great tips for preparing, storing, freezing, canning farmers market produce. And if you are a gardener and you have an overabundance of a certain crop, just a really great way to find more ideas for preparing it and using that overabundance. Instead of switching back and forth, so the next slide that I will switch back and forth, I apologize. Oh, goodness. There we go. Okay. So the next thing is on the same website, the kitchen, so you can type in the unusual produce that you found. So how many of you eat kohlrabi on a weekly basis? From what I can see, I don't see any hands up. It's not something that I eat on a weekly basis, and to be honest, it's something that's intimidated me in the past. It looks kind of scary almost, kind of very intimidating. So when I put it into the search site, I wanted to know how to prepare kohlrabi. So it listed out different ways to enjoy it. So you can enjoy it raw. You can make it into a salad. You can roast it and put it into a soup. You can actually shred it like a potato and our sweet potato and make it into a fritter. It can be roasted in the oven. It actually caramelizes and becomes quite sweet. So you can roast it with other vegetables or roast it by itself, and it's really great sweet, I mean, not sweet, steamed as well. Steaming it can be used throughout the week as well. It can get pureed into a soup or into simple sauces, so really quite versatile, even though it looks quite intimidating. And then I will pop back to the web page for it. Oh, that did not work well. Okay. Along with it, it has, whoopsies. Can you see the web page okay? Sorry, no, okay. I messed up. Nope, okay. Sure. Okay. Can you see the web page okay? Okay, there we go. Very good. So on the same page, it has 10 different ways to prepare kohlrabi as well. So it gives a recipe link for each one of them. So I think that's kind of fun too, because maybe one challenge that you could do if you're trying to find new produce that you want to try out is pick one new piece of produce each week and then look up a recipe of what to prepare. So I thought the initial recipe with the slaw looked good with the raisins, but this kohlrabi and carrot slaw looks pretty good as well. So lots of different ideas as you scroll through them. Okay. All right, since I feel like my luck is running out with flipping between screens, I'll just stay on the PowerPoint for the rest of the presentation. All right. So a little meme that I thought was kind of funny, my face when it's farmers market day. It's once you really start to get in your groove with the farmers market and know what to expect and know what you can find, it gets really exciting. And I've heard of so many people who develop relationships and friendships with people at the farmers market and the farmers. So I think that it can be quite a special event to look forward to every week. So now I just want to take a couple minutes and just go through a couple different recipes. I know recipes are in high demand, and ones that have been tried and tested are always a fan favorite. And I'll talk through where I found each one of these recipes as well. So this recipe, this first one, the nut stuffed delicata squash, this one comes from Highland Farm CSA. Highland Farm does have pickup sites available in Waukesha County, so that might be a CSA to check out in the upcoming year if you are interested in joining a CSA. So delicata squash is not one of the most common squashes, but it's a very sweet squash and really versatile. So this is a great way too to include more plant-based sources of protein and nuts. Nuts have a great cardiovascular protective benefit. One tip that I would give with this recipe is if you don't have the walnuts, pistachios, almonds, pine nuts, you can actually kind of you can use more of one nut to make up for it. So especially I know if people have ever made pesto, I've heard of people using like cashews or walnuts in place of the pine nuts, since it's not a common nut that we keep in the house. And you could absolutely sub in more of one of the nuts to make up for it. But it is a great vegetarian recipe for if you're entertaining somebody who's vegetarian. And at the Winters Farmers Market, so again, either the Oconomowoc Farmers Market or the Milwaukee County Winter Farmers Market, squash is going to be available. So a great way to still cook seasonally in the winter months. Okay. So the next recipe here is a red lentil and green soup, so the mustard green soup. So lentils are one of those, another vegetarian recipe for people who might be vegetarian or be hosting somebody who's vegetarian or be trying to eat more vegetarian meals. I know we have, if you've ever been to one of our talks before, we often talk about the benefits of plant-based sources of protein. Lentils are one of the best plant-based sources of protein. First off, they're so cheap. So for 16 servings of lentils, it's usually about $1. And when you're thinking of a serving of ground beef, just for one of the cheaper sources of protein, it's about $4 per pound of ground beef, and a serving of ground beef would be 4 ounces, so it's $1 per serving versus, again, 16 servings for $1 of lentils. So not only are they cost effective, but incredibly nutritious. Lentils are packed with fiber, which are great for our gut health, feeding our good gut bacteria. They're also great for lowering our cholesterol, so many different benefits there. And they cook up fast, so a lot of people don't like cooking beans from scratch at home. Red lentils boil up in about 15 minutes, so really, really fast. Red lentils would be available in the bean aisle, even by the canned beans. Typically, that's where you'll find the dry beans, and it would be in just a little bag by the dry beans. And they are kind of like a pinkish orangish color, and they just look like tiny little pellets. They're pretty small, but really delicious. And then this gives you the option to use any different seasonal greens. So greens are often most available. Well, they're available throughout the season. If you have ever grown greens in your garden, they grow up really well throughout the summer, and they just keep growing and growing and growing and growing. So if anybody's ever had greens in their garden and had a hard time using this up, this would be a great way to use it up. And you could freeze single servings of the soup for later in the year, or freeze your greens and use them in the soup later in the year. So you could use mustard, you could use kale, you could use collard greens, spinach would work great, so really a great recipe here. And I would say that this would be really nice too, especially on those colder summer days, kind of like today where it's kind of dreary out. So a great way to use up some of those summer greens. Okay. So this is a recipe for mushroom and broccoli quissato. You might be wondering what a quissato is, and I might even be saying it not how it's supposed to be said, but this is from another CSA website, the Vermont Valley Community Farm website. A quissato is a risotto, but made with quinoa. So if anybody's ever made a risotto, this is the exact same process, except you do it with quinoa. Quinoa, one trick with preparing quinoa, if you've ever made it before and it's ever turned out kind of bitter or had a weird aftertaste, one step you may have stepped is rinsing your quinoa. So that's really important. When you rinse your quinoa, there's a little bit of a milky residue that rinses off initially, and then you just want to rinse it until the water runs clear. So what I'll use for it is a fine mesh strainer. And so I'll just stick the amount of quinoa I'm using in the recipe, put it in the fine mesh strainer, and just let the water run over it until it's clear. And quinoa is just like red lentils, where if you boil it, it usually takes about 15 minutes from start to finish until it's fully cooked. So this is a great recipe for the summer. Broccoli is seasonal in the summer, and broccoli from the farmer's market is so sweet. It is so delicious. So if you haven't tried farmer's market broccoli before, I would say get out this weekend and try it out. Many farmers, farmers markets now have a mushroom vendor. So typically the mushroom vendor is a standalone vendor, and they typically are fanatical about their mushrooms. So if you're curious about learning more about mushrooms, I would definitely encourage you to stop by the mushroom stand at your local farmers market. It can be quite the educational experience, and they typically have recipes available too, and will give you lots of tips and tricks for storing mushrooms and preparing mushrooms, because they usually like to be in a cool, dark, dry place. Yeah, and I think all my recipes today are vegetarian. That last one was as well, and this one as well. So this one is a Thai peanut sweet potato mix, and that's served over rice. So at the farmers markets, fall time is probably more so when you would find the sweet potatoes. But I would say that they would even be available in the winter months as well. So one of my favorite things to do with sweet potatoes is roast them, and a couple months ago I did a presentation about air frying, and air frying your sweet potatoes is really a quick way to get your sweet potatoes cooked as well. But this uses a lot of fresh herbs and spices as well. Garlic, which is available at most farmers markets during the summer and fall months, would be available. Also using local honey or maple syrup in the sauce. That is usually available in the farmers market. Maple syrup might be more so available in that during the late fall time. So this recipe, it roasts the sweet potatoes, the bell pepper, which would be available in late summer, early fall, and then makes a creamy peanut sauce. If you want to add a protein to this, definitely the protein would be the peanut sauce, and then garnish it with peanuts. This could also go really well with chickpeas if you're wanting to keep it vegetarian, or you could do baked chicken with it as well, and that flavor profile would really go well. I forgot to put the source on this recipe, but this comes from a website called Cookie and Kate. And the name of the website is a little deceiving, because when I think of Cookie and Kate, I think of a cookie. So I typically think of baked goods, but it's actually the blogger's dog. So Cookie and Kate is, so it's a blog, and she has mostly vegetarian recipes. And of course, you can kind of customize them to your flavor preferences. So if you are wanting to add in like a baked chicken or fish with a recipe, you definitely can. But I think it's really fun to think outside of the box and try a new vegetarian recipe every once in a while. And all very healthy, focused in on lots of fruits, vegetables, and whole grains. So this recipe does use brown rice as its grain, but you could definitely use another grain such as quinoa or barley. It's quite versatile. Or has anybody ever tried roasted vegetables on top of a salad, on top of salad greens? Don't see any hands, but that's okay. Roasted vegetables on top of salad greens can be quite delicious. And so the peanut dressing that this makes would make an excellent salad dressing as well. So if you're going through the hassle of making the peanut sauce, feel free to double up on the recipe and try it on a salad. And that's another great way to use up salad greens as well. If you're wanting to skip the rice and instead make it a little bit of a cooler dish, you could, instead of doing it over the grain, you could do it over salad greens. All right, go to our next recipe. So a fall recipe here. So this is from All Recipes. This is a pumpkin sweet potato leek soup. So all things that you would be able to find at the farmer's market. Leeks are a little bit more summer, but you might be able to find them a little bit later in the season as well. So so this can be quite kind of a labor of love, because you're going to want to simmer this for a while, but it uses a wide variety of produce, so onions, celery, carrots, sweet potatoes. It uses the smaller pumpkins, the little sugar pumpkins, garlic, so really just all those fall flavors, and the leeks really give it a nice sweet oniony flavor. So the pumpkin, the butternut squash soups, the sweet potato soups, those are one of the things that I really look forward to every fall, purchasing those items from the farmer's market. And the flavor profile of the spices it uses, cloves, nutmeg, cinnamon, it's just really a warm flavor profile. So something maybe even to serve in late fall or even around Thanksgiving time when the winter's farmer's market is open, many of these things would be available then. Okay. I think this might be the last recipe, but I did want to throw in one salad recipe into here. So this is from Cookie and Kate as well, and this is a recipe for a kale salad. So whenever I ask people about incorporating or talk with people about incorporating more fruits and vegetables into their diet, they'll tell me, well, I'll do everything except for kale. Kale is gross. And I always think, you know, that's probably because it's never been prepared right, or they've never tried it when in a way that's appealing. And the kale can be quite bitter if not prepared correctly. So you definitely want to pull your kale leaves from the stem. Don't eat the stems. Those are tough and rough. You want to make sure to wash them really well. Kale can hold on to a little bit of grit and dirt. So wash your kale really well when you prepare it. And then you want to, so give the tip on here, sprinkle a small pinch of sea salt over the kale and massage it into the leaves. That is the trick for taking the bitterness out of your kale. So massaging it with a little bit of salt. So if you're kind to your kale will be kind to you. So it does take a little bit of love and TLC, but it will make just the biggest difference. All of a sudden the kale starts to taste so much sweeter. So this is going to be a little bit more of a late summer, early fall with the apple, but a great way to use up a lot of that summer produce. And the dressing, again, the dressing recipe is so easy. It's just olive oil, vinegar, mustard, honey, a little bit of salt and pepper to taste. You can feel free to double or triple this recipe and have this on hand for, goodness, this would probably keep for at least 2 weeks. In the refrigerator. So a great, easy vinaigrette recipe. You could just kind of make this single serving at a time, or you could make it up as one big batch. Kale actually holds up really well for storage, and this could be stored for up to 3 to 4 days if you were wanting to make it ahead of time and just kind of have a small portion with a meal as a side dish. Oh, one more recipe. So the next recipe is another salad, but using quinoa as the base. And this is something, again, if you have salad greens from the farmer's market, you could actually use this as a topping over salad greens. And I've tried that before and really enjoyed it. So another thing that I did want to mention about this recipe is, so it does have feta cheese and quinoa as two great protein sources, but if you wanted to boost up the protein a little bit to make it a little bit more filling, chickpeas goes really well in this recipe. And I don't know if anybody's a big lemon lover, so this uses fresh lemon juice as part of the dressing. I always use a full lemon. I love the zing of fresh lemon, and you could even put a little bit of lemon zest if you like the taste of lemon in your salads. If you did want to make this completely vegan with no dairy, if you have a sensitivity to dairy or if you exclude dairy from your diet, feta cheese is in the recipe, but you can feel free to exclude it. I think feta gives a little bit of a salty tang to it, so I would say if you did exclude the feta, do a few extra olives to get a little bit more of that salty tang in there. It calls for Kalamata olives. Personally, I love Kalamata olives. I think they just have a very unique flavor that can't be replaced by black olives, but if in a pinch, you could definitely use black olives. Okay. So in conclusion, I included a quote, "Make a habit of trying new things," and this, I would say, is one of the main takeaways of the presentation today. There's so many new produce items out there and maybe you've purchased the same produce that you typically use, but now just want to try it in a new way. So check out the resources for the kitchen and look up some new recipe ideas on there. But when good, healthy foods are delicious, appealing, exciting, we're going to eat them more often. So I think it does take time to try out new ideas, but when you're trying out the new food ideas, when you're trying out new produce, when you're trying out new recipes, it really does make it more exciting and more interesting.